Lara Trump, whose name was mispronounced by her father-in-law today in her home state of North Carolina, was filling in for a clearly exhausted Trump today. She sat down with the Breakfast Club less than a week after Vice President Harris was on the show. Lara spent practically the entire hour getting fact-checked and even laughed at.
But has Biden drilled more than Trump?
I don't believe that's true.
Yeah, that's a fact.
Where?
You can look it up.
He's on Google.
He's drilled more than Trump.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't believe that's true at all.
If the bipartisan border bill was so bad, like you say, how come so many Republicans were for it until Donald Trump intervened to say no?
I don't think Donald Trump intervened at all. He's not in an elected office right now, and
he literally told them not to do it.
That I don't think that's true. But I also
his policies, especially towards women, they absolutely take away rights from women. What do you think about that?
How's that?
What do you mean?
Which rights?
Reproductive freedoms, a major issue in this election, which is co-chair of the Republican National Committee. You should very well know. Lara was also asked about Trump's long and well-documented history of racism.
A lot of people feel that Trump is racist. And what do you say to that? You know, in 73, of course, it was when he got sued for not renting to African Americans. And 89, when he took out the ad in the paper. And I mean, even saying Obama wasn't born here and show his birth certificate. And there's numerous things. So what do you say to that?
I will say I've never seen this man say a racist thing. I think the attacks are fairly. Why is that funny, Charlamagne?
I'm just like, it's hysterical. But I mean,
but no, Charlamagne,
people act like there's no such thing as Google.
Trump's racism, which is very Googleable, is again in focus today after members of the exonerated Central Park Five sued Trump for making false and defamatory statements during his one and only disastrous debate with Vice President Harris.
The Central Park Five, they admitted, they said they pled guilty. And I said, well, if they pled guilty, they badly hurt a person, killed a person ultimately. And if they pled guilty, then they pled, we're not guilty.
The lawsuit includes accounts of an exchange of one of the exonerated five that they had with Trump on debate night, where Yusuf Salaam sought to confront Trump over his statements in the spin room. It also cites several statements made by Trump after Harris attacked him for having bought ads in 1989 that called for the death penalty for the five teenagers, where Trump wrote, quote, "I want to hate these murderers, and I always will. I am not looking to psychoanalyze or understand them. I am looking to punish them." Now, it's worth noting that the Central Park Five's convictions were vacated in 2002, and New York City paid $41 million in 2014 to settle their civil rights suit. Meanwhile, a New York jury this year found Trump liable for the sexual abuse and defamation of E. Jean Carroll, an adjudicated assault that took place just 5 years after the Central Park Five case.
Googleable. I have never heard that phrase, but only Joy Reid can use certain phrases and get away with it. And she's spot on. And now, isn't it ironic that he and she brought it home? Isn't it ironic that he talks about the exonerated five when he himself? So let's let the same apply. Right. He's an adjudicated sexual offender. So we asked, he should be put to death. We asked Yusuf Salaam a couple of times. Last time I saw him, was it Bus Boys and Poets, or I think I saw him after that, and asked him about that full page ad and whether or not they should. And he told me something I didn't know. They did, in fact, take out an ad not long ago in the New York Times when Trump was convicted, which was great for them. But imagine the same logic applied. If he applied the same logic to himself, then he should be executed, because he called for their execution. And so really, he should be embracing the exonerated five, because among other reasons he should be embracing them is because he's trying to have his situation overturned. Isn't that ironic? And then Lara Trump. I mean, she's getting on Charlamagne for laughing. You can't help but to laugh. She's well aware of her father-in-law's racism. She's well aware of his father's racism. She's well aware of their whole clan, that whole circle of that she's quite involved in. She's aware of all of their racism. And to spin it any other, you can't spin it. He's just been the one thing about Donald Trump, he's been very open about it. So you can't spin it any other way. Dr. Nicole says, more and more I am believing the J.D. Vance theory. They really don't want Trump. They want that younger nut job. They're just using Trump for his popularity. See, Greer, you got a true believer there. Because more and more, I say Greer has a true belief because he's the first person that I heard articulate that. But literally, before that, I had not heard anybody else say it. You may have thought it. I've not heard anybody else say that. And she said it some time ago. But JD, I was looking at Dr. Nicole. I was looking at a picture this morning for some reason. It came across on my scroll this picture of JD Vance's wife, and you notice he never talks about her or never brings her public. And I find it very ironic. It's very ironic. It's almost like Tim Scott's girlfriend. So, um, but nonetheless, we have several things to talk about, from the exonerated five taking legal action against Donald Trump to the disturbing subway chokehold trial in New York that's now underway. We are, of course, covering news that matters, and we're bringing the receipts. Also, this morning, we're going to be talking with Zoe Towns, the executive director of Forward.us, to dive into some surprising new poll numbers showing bipartisan support for criminal justice reform. You're not going to want to miss that conversation. RNG says the only thing about the JD Vance theory, Trump would fire JD if he feels threatened by him. Well, under normal circumstances, yeah, you can see that. But first and foremost, and I know RNG knows this. The president cannot fire the vice president. Number one, but number two, and perhaps even more important, is that this is all Heritage Foundation. This is all Project 2020s. This is their project 2025, Project 2025. This is their project. JD Vance is their guy. And he is the one that, as Greer put it, as Dr. Nicole put it, he's the one. Trump is being used for his popularity, exactly. But hopefully we won't have to see this scenario play out. But I surmise that if he were to win the election in a couple of weeks, it won't be long before they get rid of Donald Trump one way or the other. These nut jobs at these alleged assassination attempts and things like that. You got to understand that the one guy that they did arrest for taking a shot is a MAGA Republican. Was this a message from the Heritage Foundation? Who knows? Orange says Trump would make him step down. How about that? Again, I don't think Trump would have the power. I think the idea is to use Trump to gain the power that the Heritage Foundation desperately seeks. And then it's one of those things. We're going to show you who has the real power. And just think about all of these mostly racist, pretty much racist individuals, powerful racist individuals behind that whole Project 2025. You got to be racist to put that together. They're the ones behind all of this. They're the ones that got rid of Roe v. Wade. They're the ones who have sick lawyers on this, on DE&I, and they've really shown themselves that they are the ones that they have a measure of power now. They want complete control is what they're going for. Mike V says, but wouldn't you still have Donald Jr., who is supposed to be a contender in 2028? I think that's a joke. I don't think the heritage. I think the one thing about the folks of the Heritage Foundation is that listen, it's Donald Trump is a means to an end. And if they are able to accomplish that next month, you're not going to see a transition to little Trump. I think you're going to see that JD Vance and folks like JD Vance. I think that's what they want. I don't think they really want to deal with the Trump family as for longer than they have to. The Trump family is an absolute disaster for them. It's an absolute disaster. And you think about all the issues of Donald Jr. and of course Trump himself and the other Eric and the others. They're an absolute disaster. Yeah, the Trump family is not their end goal. The Trump family, I strongly believe, based on various reporting, they are being used by the Heritage Foundation and folks who support the Heritage Foundation. And I don't think that those folks that run the show want to be bothered with the Trump family for much longer. And I mean, actually see a scenario where they allow Trump to go to prison after if they win the election, even if they win the election, just to get him out the way. I mean, think about it. Trump is a cult leader, like we talked about. Was it Rashonda who mentioned my whole Jim Jones thing, and Jim Jones had no fans outside of his cult. Trump has no fans. He has no fans.
Yeah, I think the 19th Amendment should be repealed. I think that because, well, first and foremost, because I'm a Christian, and that is the Christian position. Oh my gosh, that you're saying that? Yes, that is the Christian position, is that households should not be divided against one another. So by repealing the 19th Amendment, just for the record, it's not just trying to take away a female vote, but it's trying to say, no, there's a family vote. Right. There's a household. And it's like, well, where do women get their voice? Well, where women get their voice is from their father, from their husband. If they're not married, it's from their father. If they're not married and their father is dead, it's from their brother, it's from their uncle, it's the men in their lives that love them.
That they didn't know who Joel Webbon is and they didn't know why it mattered. He mattered a lot more to us. And that's part of the issue that I am encountering, is that a lot of MAGA people don't actually know what Trump and the second term is about. And it's not about making America great. I can tell you that right now. One of the sponsors of Project 2025 is the CFRA. And the CFRA is directly linked to an internal Christo-fascist memo that Joel Webbon and some of these other lunatics edited and co-authored, which states that the second Trump term, a big part of that is going to be this Christo-fascist country that they want to create, Christian nationalism, where your rights as a woman are going to be severely limited. Joel Webbon is talking about repealing the 19th Amendment and that women's votes should count towards their husband's votes. And if they're not married, then it's their father's votes. And if their father is dead, then it's their brother's votes. Joel Webbon is a proponent of no fault divorce, right? So if your husband is raping you and beating you, Sorry, lady. That's God's law. That sucks for you. You can't get out. Joe Webben is a proponent that IVF is evil, and so is contraception. And the people that have signed on to Project 2025, it's not like they're just like this guy. Some of these people are senators. Some of these people have deep pockets, and they don't actually care if it hurts America. What they care about is control, because they're fascists, and that's what fascists do. But they're coming in the idea of the holy rose this time, but they're talking about armed confrontations. These people are the same people who said that we're in the midst of a second American Revolution, and as long as the left does not protest, it will remain bloodless. These are the same people who are openly discussing a theonomy, who are talking about how to get around words that set off alarm bells in the population so that they can pass laws that will limit your rights. And that's who Trump is letting in. That's what J.D. Vance and Peter Thiel and all of these lunatics believe, that we need to go back to a Christo white run country without women in any power, without minorities, without different religions. And it is the Al Qaeda. This is the American Taliban. And what they're talking about is genuinely scary. And you should know this. If you're voting for Trump, that's what they're trying to usher in.
And Liz Cheney was kind of talking about that as well. She said something I thought was very interesting. She said she's trying to get white women to quietly, she says, go behind their husband's back and vote against Trump. And that's really a shame. It's a shame to folks. You get married, you know the whole idea. You fall in love and all that stuff. She's all that. She's this. He's all that. In a bag of chips, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now she's a slave. How is that? How does that work? That's their mentality. And so Liz Cheney is telling them to sneak behind their backs, as if acknowledging that the consequences of saying, "Hey, I want to exercise my freedom, period, to do essentially what I want." So, so these folks are, when we talked before, and Lauren Burke uh, vehemently vehemently protest when it comes to, and others protest as well, when we saw the backlash from Barack Obama when he's talking about black men. um their One of their biggest positions is talk to white women. Dr. Nicole, listening to that clip, says that it's The Handmaid's Tale. I think, who was just telling me about The Handmaid's Tale? Greer, was it you? Um, it's The Handmaid's Tale. Lauren G says, what times does the second American Revolution start? If January 6th wasn't indicated, they are screwed. But it's really interesting. And Austin that mentioned JD Vance's wife, how Trump would deport her. Um, I allude back to that picture I saw in which they talk about her in some books that she reads or whatever. She seems just like she was brought in from somewhere else. One of them, dare I say, what do you call it? Arranged marriages or shotgun marriages or whatever you want to call it. Not at all happy, and stuck, and very, very much um, bossed around. And that's what they see, the husband as the boss. And not just the boss, but it's like whatever. The Handmaid's Tale, what I was told about that, it's very, very true. It's this is, you see it with these men. And you see it with these women, they're lost. They believe they have it all, but they have nothing. Her and her children shaking my head. That man is truly crazy, shaking my head, she says. Um, it's really, really so that's really where the focus should be, if you ask me, if I were uh the Democrats. If I the focus would be we need to really empower these white women to go with their interest, their families, their daughters' interest, their granddaughters' interests, their mother's interest. They go against their own interests all the time to support racist white men. Pretty interesting. Um, let's dive into the exonerated five situation. They have kicked off a major legal battle against Donald Trump. They are suing him for defamation. Uh, they say that he used the debate stage and every other stage to um, defame them. Of course, we know that the exonerated five, formerly known as the Central Park Five, were wrongfully charged, wrongfully convicted in one of the most notorious cases of the late 1980s. It took till 2002 for their exoneration. DNA evidence and a confession from the real perpetrator cleared them of any involvement in that assault. Yet, despite overwhelming proof of their innocence and the declaration of their innocence by the courts, New York City paying them $41 million in damages, Trump has continued to double down on his false claims about them. So during the debate in September, Trump falsely claimed that they pled guilty and even went as far as to say that they killed someone, which is categorically false. In fact, the lawsuit makes it clear that no one was killed in the assault and that the men were cleared of all charges over 20 years ago. The exonerated five include Antron McCray, Kevin Richardson, Raymond Santana, Corey Wise, and of course, New York City Councilman Yusef Salam. They're seeking damages for emotional distress and reputational harm. They argue that Trump's comments have caused them ongoing pain and continue to tarnish their efforts to rebuild their lives. The lawsuit also highlights Trump's long history with the case, starting with those infamous 1989 full page newspaper ads where he called for the death penalty for the then teenagers. Even after DNA evidence exonerated them, Trump continued his assault on them, refusing to apologize and repeating that they were guilty. And if you recall, as recently as 2013, he called their exoneration a quote, one sided piece of garbage. So in the lawsuit, uh, the lawsuit says Trump has knowingly spread falsehoods with reckless disregard for the truth, and his comments have perpetrated a false narrative about their innocence. And of course, as we said at the top, and we showed you in the clip at the top, Yusef Salam had a face to face encounter with Trump after the debate. He introduced himself, and Trump waved him off. He actually, he said, Trump says, "Oh, you're on my side." And Salam says, "No, absolutely not. I'm not on your side." This is how delusional Trump really is. Not to mention the 34 felony charges that he was convicted of, and he's facing over 50 more if he loses the election. And of course, the adjudicated sexual assault charge against him, he was convicted of civilly. So now they rightfully so, want to hold this man accountable. Power 96 says, seriously, how many examples do black men need? Trump has doubled down on the exonerated five. His supporters have beat up black men, called them racist names, kicked them out of chat rooms, and he can go on, he says. And he's not wrong. He's not wrong. Uh, Also in New York, the case that has been stirring emotions across the country, the trial of Daniel Penny, a former Marine who's facing manslaughter and criminally negligent homicide charges after placing Jordan Neely in a fatal chokehold on a New York City subway. The trial has captured national attention especially because the entire incident was caught on video, and the footage is the central piece of evidence. And so here's, of course, what happened. Jordan Neely, who was a well-known Michael Jackson impersonator, had been struggling with homelessness and mental health issues. And on the day of the incident, Neely was reportedly acting erratically on the subway, while other passengers, who many were familiar with him, understood the situation. Daniel Penny intervened, and video showed that him placing Mr. Neely in a chokehold for several minutes, long enough to cause Neely's death. Daniel Penny's defense is arguing that the chokehold wasn't intended to kill Mr. Neely, but that it was used to restrain him because he was posing a threat to others on the train. Um, Prosecutors say, no, no, no. That's just not the case. They say that Daniel Penny used excessive force, especially considering Neely's vulnerable state. He was homeless, mentally ill, and unarmed. New York City medical examiner ruled that Neely's death is indeed a homicide. If convicted, Daniel Penny faces up to 15 years in prison. And it just discounts, all of this discounts how tragic Jordan Neely's life was. His mother was murdered when he was just 14 years old. And those who know him say this was a trauma that contributed to his mental health struggles. He did find solace in performing on the subways. He was a regular in Times Square as well, known for his spot-on Michael Jackson impressions. I mean, countless tourists and even the locals, they would go see him perform, of course, offer money for his performances. And even one of his friends, a guy named Moses Harper, wrote a deeply moving tribute to him, describing how Jordan was always full of life when performing, but carried immense personal pain. He wrote that for Jordan, performing was his escape from the realities of his life. Moses Harper also talked about the systemic failures that led to Jordan's being homeless and untreated for his mental illness. He says the system failed Jordan. He said Jordan didn't have a high school diploma. He was homeless and had faced years of neglect. And so this trial is not just about whether Daniel Penny's actions were justified. It's about how people treat the most vulnerable in society. It's about race, it's about mental health, and the public safety issues that come up when those two collide. So the question is, will the justice system hold this ex-Marine accountable? Or will Jordan Neely's death become another symbol of the failures in how this world addresses or fails to address mental health and homelessness in America? Mike V says, who did Daniel think he was, protecting from a street performer? 100%. 100%. Um, harmless guy. Harmless guy by all accounts, a very harmless individual, this Jordan Neely, engulfed in trauma. And how he dealt with it, that pain, was to perform as his idol, Michael Jackson. Orrin G remembers that Mayor Adams was very hesitant to condemn the murder. Yeah, it's true. As the prosecutor said, this is a guy, he was not armed. He didn't have a gun or a knife or any type of object that could have hurt anyone. And to watch and for those that stand by and watch this man, this young man die for no reason. It's really sad. Let's talk about justice being served in Kansas, where a white man from Wichita has been sentenced to prison for terrorizing Black children. And see, again, we talked about Project 2025. Talked about Project 2025, and these are the things, folks. You got to understand once again, this is what you're buying into if you're buying into that. If you are going along with the Heritage Foundation and their candidates. This guy is only facing justice because we don't have full implementation yet of Project 2025. Terrorizing Black children. This guy, Austin Showman, 31 years old with a history of racial harassment. He was sentenced to 80 months in federal prison for threatening to kill 2 Black children while waving a gun at them outside a Quick Trip in July of 2022. The U.S. Attorney's Office said Showman had been drinking when he saw the 2 children leaving the store. He got out of his car and started hurling racial slurs at these children, including started yelling white power. When a Black woman tried to intervene and de-escalate the situation, he pulled out a gun, took out a bullet from the chamber, and made a clear threat to her. The court documents state that he threatened the children because they were Black and because they were simply enjoying the services of the store. And you should note that this wasn't an isolated incident for Showman. He has a history of targeting Black people with racial threats. In 2021, he began harassing Black guests who visited his white ex-girlfriend's house. He even sent threatening messages to her family and friends, including disturbing videos where he threatened to, quote, get rid of poverty by killing Black people. In one message, he said, quote, one cap to the head, N-word, dead. Showman's violent and racist behavior escalated over time, and in this case, the law finally caught up with him. The Department of Justice caught up with him. Let's be clear. The Department of Justice has a civil rights division. Without that, Showman would be walking around a free man. And Project 2025 eliminates the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division. Read it for yourselves. The sentence is, prosecutors say, is a clear message that hate crimes under this administration will not be tolerated. They'll be prosecuted. But it also really highlights the kind of hate-filled violence that's still so prevalent in America today. Showman is getting 80 months in prison. So, wow. Orange G says, if I did that to white kids, I would have received 18 years for the gun charge alone. What a miscarriage of justice. And Mike V says, after drinking, a drunk mind has a sober tongue. How about that? How about that? Wow. So much of this, it it takes you all back to Project 2025. Project 2025 is real. Some of it's been implemented, but there's a whole lot more that will be implemented if they have their way. Um, so it's something to consider. Now, our conversation with Zoe Towns on criminal justice reform. You might be a little surprised at what she has to say as far as how it is and how it could affect the polls next month. Let's go to our conversation. We have the pleasure of speaking with Zoe Towns, the executive director of Ford US, and I hope I said that right, FWD.US, to discuss the growing support for criminal justice reform in America as we head into this most consequential, everyone says it's the most consequential election ever. New polling data reveals overwhelming bipartisan backing for reform across the justice system. And as viewers of Let It Be Known realize, we talk about cases that you guys yourself, our viewers and others scream, we need reform, we need change. A recent poll by BSG shows that 81% of likely voters, including 85% of Democrats, 82% of independents, and 76% of Republicans, support policy changes aimed at reducing incarceration. This support spans blue, red, and purple states, with majorities in battleground states like Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, and Pennsylvania expressing strong favorability towards reform. Interestingly, the poll also highlights that support for criminal justice reform is particularly strong, of course, among Black and Latino voters who are increasingly advocating for policies that promise genuine safety and justice. While tough on crime rhetoric remains a staple in many campaigns, there's a clear shift as voters recognize the harm caused by mass incarceration and seek alternatives that address root causes of crime, such as homelessness, poverty, and mental health challenges. In this context, criminal justice reform has emerged as a potentially decisive issue in the upcoming election. Today, Zoe Towns shares her insights on why this issue resonates so deeply with voters and how candidates can leverage it to build trust and what true public safety could look like in the United States. Zoe, welcome to Let It Be Known.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be part of this show.
Absolutely, it's our pleasure. I'm gonna start with that bipartisan consensus. 81% of likely voters backing criminal justice reform. How would you explain this rare bipartisan agreement, and what does it suggest about the changing attitudes toward public safety?
It's a good question. So, the truth is that this voter support, this appetite for reform comes from voter experience. And so basically voters across the political spectrum have been overexposed to the harms of mass incarceration for decades now. We've got 1 in 2 Americans who have experienced incarceration within their immediate families. This is like brother, sister, dad, kid. Half of American adults have experienced incarceration directly, in that familial way. And what we saw in that research where we looked at sort of how families have experienced incarceration is that it's the exposure rate is the same if you are a Republican voting household and if you are a Democratic voting household. So, the harms of mass incarceration are bipartisan. And so the support for reform we're seeing is also pretty bipartisan. And it's that experience of those harms and that kind of like high cost, low return on public safety that is coupled with a really large and growing body of evidence that shows that we can do things differently. We've got, a ton of research saying that. We also have a ton of examples. We've got reforms in states across the country, from Texas to Georgia to the federal government with the First Step Act to California to New York, that have demonstrated to voters that, like, hold on a minute, we don't actually have to be punishing and incarcerating our way out of all of these problems. We actually can do things differently and have safety and justice at the same time. And people want more of that. And that's been experienced. The harms of mass incarceration and more recently, the benefits of reform have been experienced by folks living in red states and blue states and purple states in cities and in rural jurisdictions. And so it's really we're really seeing a pretty like unusual consensus on a policy issue for a country that is just hyper partisan and hyper divided on so many things. But on this one, people are really seeing, reform as a pretty common sense and overdue solution.
It's interesting you mentioned that everyone is affected, whether you are in a blue state or a red state, whether you're a Republican, whether you're a Democrat, whether you're independent, everyone is affected. And then we talked about the battleground states. How critical, Zoe, do you believe criminal justice reform will be in determining the next president? And why do you think that it seems both major candidates have largely sidestepped this issue?
Yeah, I think it's a missed opportunity, or I think it's an untapped opportunity. I think that voters want to, what we see in our polling is that voters are more likely to come out and vote for a candidate that demonstrates support for criminal justice reform. So you've got a policy where voters are excited about it. You've got evidence that shows it's going to work. You've got evidence that shows it's going to like help the economy, help community, help keep families together, reduce racial disparities in a country that is plagued by racial disparities. And so I think it's a massively untapped opportunity. You have seen a little bit of, nods to both kind of from both major candidates about the injustices in the system, but we haven't really seen either of them really embrace a reform mantle.
Well, one of the candidates believed that his convictions is unjust too. So, but go ahead.
Yeah.
I won't put you on that spot.
Well, exactly, and it's interesting. It's interesting that the former president understands that to be an experience that he can connect with voters on. So, like, whether it's however folks are voting, I do think it is super interesting that former President Trump understands that talking about the injustice and talking about a two-tiered system of justice could resonate with a lot of people. Now, what I'm sure and what I know is that it's not billionaires and it's not former presidents who suffer from mass incarceration. It is, by and large, folks that are living in poverty. It is also far more likely for you to experience incarceration, arrest, prosecution, imprisonment if you are Black American, if you are Latino American. And so what we're trying to sort of think about is sort of how to help candidates feel like they can speak to this issue that is so resonant with so many people. And that's not because so many people in America are more likely to commit crime, more criminal. That's not true at all. We're not talking about that at all. We're talking about is a system that has been massively gone out of balance and therefore has defined for the worst far too many people's lives. And so not acknowledging it, not sort of speaking about this thing that is like weighing on people's families and separating people from their children and interrupting their economic potential is just missing an opportunity to connect with so many different voters that want to hear real sensible solutions that impact their daily lives.
See, I like Zoe because you could tell she could take shots without you knowing she's taking shots. But I caught some things there. Don't be misled. But Zoe, and you touched on this. Let's talk about this because despite widespread support for reform, we still see candidates leaning into this message of tough on crime. And why does that approach persist? And how can reform advocates such as yourself effectively counter these messages?
Yeah, unfortunately, for every American election back that's been studied, so for hundreds of years, scaring people to the ballot box has been the cheapest way to get people to vote for you, right? Whether it's scaring them on immigration or scaring them on crime or scaring them on foreign influence, whatever it might be. And in the case of crime, that's always been a particularly easy and handy tool for politicians looking for a quick message. That doesn't mean that crime is not a real issue and that public safety shouldn't be a paramount concern to candidates and to the people who are going to vote. It means that, what I think voters are understanding more and more and is that, politicians are playing politics with an issue that should be quite important, right? We actually know what works to advance safe communities. We know what we need. We have a ton of evidence base about what brings down violence, what brings down, drug use that harms people. We have a lot of evidence, and we can find a lot more evidence if we sort of get out of our own way and stop playing politics with these really important issues. So why do people persist? I think because it's easy and it's an old habit. I do think it's happening less. And I think that's because it's landing differently on people. People are just bringing to those commercials that you see where, you've got the sort of oftentimes racist imagery or, sort of like overly simple stories about people feeling unsafe and grandmas having to lock their gates. All those old tropes, the Willie Horton tropes from campaigns that have been going on for decades. I think that voters, when they watch those, are watching those alongside an alternative lived experience, right? So like that's competing. They're also seeing the other side of that sort of punishment paradigm and seeing maybe their friend, maybe their brother, maybe their mom, right? And they're kind of like, wait a second, that's not totally clocking. Yes, I want to be safe. Yes, I don't want to have to be afraid in my home and in my streets, and my kids should be able to have all kinds of safety, which, including clean water, all these different things that we need. And also, I need you to come with a real solution that does not involve incarcerating my community out of out of here. So I think I do think it's changing a little bit. We have seen, for example, just like last week, a couple of stories came out that were tracking paid media spending in the national presidential election, and spending on commercials that featured crime had dropped massively. And that is kind of they're seeing a lot of the same numbers we're seeing in terms of like what voters want to hear about. We keep seeing poll after poll. Voters want to hear about pocketbook issues. They are concerned about how to put food on the table, how to pay these gas bills. They are concerned about how to make sure their kids are safe and well and fed and going to schools that are, good and keeping them thriving. So they're not, so I think that we see that a little bit in some of the paid media spending, where both Vice President Harris and former President Trump have massively dropped down their investments in kind of the old tough on crime commercials. And I hope that's because they're seeing what we're seeing, which is that voters aren't that persuaded by it anymore. We'll see.
Well, here's something too. It's been 30 years now since the infamous 1994 crime bill, and that legacy still lives on. But having said that, how does that legacy continue to shape both public perception, Zoe, and policy in today's criminal justice debates, especially among Black and Latino communities?
Yeah, I should say that like when we did this recent polling with BSG, we did a big national survey. We do them from time to time. We did one in February as well when there was a different, Democratic candidate. We did one in 2022 during the midterms. And what we've seen consistently is these very high support levels for criminal justice reform, for reducing incarceration, for reducing sentences, for going back to look at old sentences that, like whether it's second look sentencing or parole, all these things that would kind of remedy some of the harms of the past. And we see support across the board just leap up when you're talking about the communities that have most experienced those injustices. So for Black communities, for especially Black men, that support level increases sometimes by 10, 20 percentage points. And so you've got, for example, 7 in 10 Black men voters saying that a candidate supporting justice reform would make them more likely to vote for them. That number is 5 in 10, which is already very high across the board generally. And so you've got a deeper well of support from the folks that are most educated about the harms of going in the wrong direction. And all that education comes from, decades. And you mentioned one of the most kind of infamous moments in the 90s when you have this big federal crime fighting bill that was really jam-packed with money to build prisons, money to build jails, money for more police officers, a really punishment-focused reform package that is not the only reason at all why we have mass incarceration. There's so many state and local laws that kind of like collectively built up to this system. But it was a moment where leadership at the highest levels, and from a bipartisan viewpoint, said the best way to keep us safe is to really embrace a punishment agenda. And they had a couple of things in there for rehabilitation, for victim services. So it had stuff going in there. And thankfully, a lot of that stuff came from the time from the Congressional Black Caucus that fought for it. But by and large, it was a huge endorsement of sort of punishment, and it flew in the face of a lot of evidence that said this is going to land really tragically and really disproportionately on certain communities, and it did. We have, a federal prison system that is far too large. It's the largest prison system in the country. 1 in 8 people who are imprisoned in America are imprisoned in the federal system. They're more likely to be there for drug crimes. They're more likely to be there. If you're a Black person, you're likely to have a longer sentence in federal prison. So we're still carving our way out of a lot of those harms. There are people who were sentenced under those laws who are still incarcerated today and who don't necessarily have a shot of coming home, and their families and loved ones are voters. They're voters, and they have experienced those realities, and they're bringing that to the ballot box.
So, what are some of the other specific parts of criminal justice reform or criminal justice issues that you're finding, that your organization is finding, that is at or near the top of the agenda for particularly Black and Latino voters?
One of the policies that polls really high for Black and Latino voters is clemency. Is this power that presidents and governors have to revisit a sentence and to say, wait a second, like, did we get this right, or is this still necessary? And I think that is really resonant with people, because sure, we need to really, really right size and change the way our system works moving forward, but we also, a lot of us have loved ones who are still suffering from pretty poor policy decisions from the past. And so reforms like, initiatives like clemency, you had the Obama clemency initiative that brought home nearly 2,000 people from federal prison with an average 10 years saved off of their sentences. We are hopeful at Forward.us and with a lot of other groups, and the polling supports it, that President Biden in his final months will embrace a robust clemency initiative as well. And governors across the country, anyone, anywhere, can call on their governor and say, I don't need the legislature. I don't need a whole big to do. What you have the power, you need a pen and a piece of paper to bring my loved one home. And that, second chances are a serious part of any real safety agenda. That, like, if you're talking about safety, you need to be talking about second chances as well. Like, how and when people come home and begin to rebuild their communities and families is a huge part of what safety is supposed to look like.
Yeah, and you mentioned the power of the pen that the president has. You're talking about pardon, the ability to pardon or commute sentences. And in the case of the current president, he knows he's not coming back for another term. And also, by the time he makes these decisions or releases these decisions, the election will have been over. So really, isn't it a time to really capitalize on this issue?
We think so. We think it's, we wish that there was always an ongoing sort of season of clemency. We wish people didn't wait until the end, but we're at the end now. So, like, let's go. Let's do it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you talk about a president who says he's not gonna pardon his own son. So I don't know.
Yeah.
I tend to doubt that too, but we'll see what
We'll see what
happens.
happens. We'll see what
Zoe, so beyond the campaign rhetoric, how can voters distinguish when you have folks who are really looking at this issue and they're saying we are looking for that candidate, that candidate who's going to really get behind this? How can they distinguish between candidates who genuinely support criminal justice reform and those using it just as a talking point?
It's a good question. I think that, there's a lot been written on both of these candidates' legacies on the issue. I think it is actually quite telling that it's pretty hard to run for national office now and not have done something good on this, right? That's a moment in American history. 8 years ago, that wasn't the case. You didn't have to have done something on criminal justice, but you've got former President Trump signed the First Step Act, brought 30,000 people home from federal prison. Obviously, this was a congressional, piece of legislation that was voted on by more Democrats than Republicans, but it was bipartisan legislation signed by Donald Trump ultimately, and had a huge impact on a lot of people's lives. You've got, Vice President Harris, who worked on that bill, who worked to expand that bill when she was a senator, who also did a lot of, kind of at the time, forward-looking reform work when she was a district attorney in San Francisco. She also, as vice president, has done things like ensure that the United States Sentencing Commission is fully staffed and moving amendments so that they can do things like reduce sentences and look at new sentencing guidelines that have already brought thousands of folks home from federal prisons in the last just 12 months alone. So there's these things that have happened. Why they're not shouting them from the rooftop, I cannot explain. I think it's all upside for them, but the information is available. And I think for voters, the opportunity is to sort of say to their candidates, to make it known, like, this is what I'm looking for. You don't have to be afraid. Like I'm looking for you to explain what you're going to do on this issue. I'm calling for you to do more on this issue. And hopefully we'll see. And that's not just from president. There are, we have this mess of that we're in with this broken justice system, that because of decisions that are made at the local level, school boards, DAs, mayors, sheriffs, tons of people who folks are going out to vote for, city council members, state legislators, so there's an opportunity to be very local and very in your community, and turning to the politician closest to you and say, what are you doing to advance more freedom and more safety in my community? I know I can have both. And so I want to know what your agenda is.
So Zoe, you for .USA, .us, I should say, .us, for .us, you think that criminal justice is a winning issue?
I think that, this is an extremely tight election, and it's going to come down to a small number of votes in a small number of states. And what we see is this is an issue that can tip the balance. And we know that it's also a low risk proposition. There's not some huge group of Americans who are saying, if you speak out on this, I'm going to stay home or I'm going to vote for the other person. In actual fact, it's a tiny minority of people for whom this offends them. Most people want to see a candidate that is talking about this, a small number. And then there's a population of folks that don't really mind either way. It's a low risk proposition with a bunch of upside. And so if I was running in this tight field and I had an issue that was good policy and good politics, I would want to bring it to the fore.
You obviously talk to more than just us about this. You talk to a lot of entities and people about this criminal justice reform. Zoe, what are some of the biggest misconceptions you encounter when discussing criminal justice reform, and how does us work to educate voters on what actually contributes to safer communities?
I think that's a great question. I think that one of the biggest misconceptions is just what you just intimated, is that we have to choose between safety and justice, and it's just it's a lie we've been told for a really long time, and it's so harmful because we don't. And what we know is that, for example, 45 states over the last 10 years have reduced both their imprisonment rates and their crime rates. The 5 states that increased their imprisonment rates saw a less of a reduction in crime. We know that you can have, you can bring people home months, years earlier, and they have lower recidivism than the folks that are coming out later, and then control groups. There's been just this robust body of evidence at the meta level and in the more particular level, showing that, like, we do not need as much incarceration as we have. We could have dramatically less and still be continue to advance more and more safety. And that if we do that, we free up all kinds of political capital, actual capital. Imprisonment is expensive, to invest in all the things that we know have a huge evidence base behind them that keep us safe. That's, anything from like building up infrastructure in communities that have not had it, cleaning up streets, turning lights on, making sure that there's, summer job programs, making sure that there's after school programs. If this stuff sounds soft, it shouldn't, because it literally saves people's lives, right? It's literally, keeping people alive. And we have sort of put it over to the side as some sort of like, we'll fund you but we know we're going to fund punishment. And we really need to be flipping that paradigm if we want to see real safety in our communities. The other thing that I think we hear is sort of like a despair from people, like, what really works, and has reform worked? And I think that comes from a couple of places. It comes from a large body of people who are against reform, and so they are sort of spewing lies in the press that are sort of drumming up fear. It also comes from people who are just so frustrated because it hasn't moved fast enough. And so I'll just tell you a couple of statistics that I find really heartening. that give me a lot of hope. Since the peak of mass incarceration in 2008, the prison population has dropped by 20%. That's not as much as we need. It is a heck of a achievement for Black people who have, as we've talked about, have been most harmed by incarceration. The imprisonment rate has dropped by 1/2. Black men today are more likely to graduate from college than to go to prison, which should always be the case, but actually it wasn't the case a decade ago. So those declines in incarceration have actually flipped the life trajectory opportunities for Black men on average in America. And that all happened because a whole bunch of people in communities across America said louder and louder and louder, this isn't working. Like, this doesn't make sense for my family. I need something different. And that meant that a whole bunch of reforms passed, whether it was bail reforms or second look sentencing or expanded parole or clemencies. And all of those added up to not enough. We are not there. We are still a country that mass incarcerates. We are still a country that overly disproportionately incarcerates Black people and Black men. But we have seen that when we try to do this and when we invest time, energy, and votes, that we can actually flip people's sort of generational chances of opportunity and thriving.
Wow, I enjoyed those stats that you threw out there. That is amazing. I wasn't fully aware of that. And before we let you go, Zoe, how do you foresee this issue of criminal justice reform evolving even beyond the 2024 election cycle?
Yeah, I think a lot of those stats I just said come from momentum that is way bigger than one election cycle. And like I said, you can change these the outcomes in criminal justice in so many different kinds of ways at the local level, at your local school, at your state legislature. And so I am feeling pretty optimistic. The polling and also just our conversations with policymakers and with voters and with directly impacted people tells me that we are really on the front end of what will be hopefully many, many years of changes that happen electorally, that happen through legislation, that happen through direct service providers, all kinds of different things. So it's a time to get as engaged as possible, both politically and also just in our communities about what we can do, because we know so much more now, and so we don't have to be afraid or in the dark. There's so many ways to get engaged and to build a safer, freer America.
Yeah, and real quick, I'm sorry, I got to throw this in too because Greer mentions a thing here where it appeared that the vice president did not include include criminal justice reform in her latest agenda, but she did mention the marijuana
Yes.
and cannabis and how she would work with that to empower particularly Black men. That's a part of criminal justice reform, isn't it?
It's a huge part of it. She's also said, she's going to make sure that the DOJ civil rights is going to continue to do work to hold, police departments accountable. She has called out the former president for talking about he wants to expand universal stop and frisk, which we know is nothing good on the other side of that. And like I said, beyond and she's of course already been working with President Biden to do things like pardon folks with federal marijuana convictions. And so there's a legacy to build on and to run on, and hopefully she and other candidates will keep doing that.
And how can folks learn more about what you guys are doing at forward.us?
Well, you can find us by typing in our name, fwd.us, on any social media, or that's our website. We've got a lot of research, a lot of polling, some storytelling. Please look us up and get engaged.
Get engaged. Zoe Towns, we really, really appreciate you joining Let It Be Known to talk about what really is a vital, vital issue, not just for, as Zoe pointed out, for everyone, whether you're a Republican, whether you're independent, whether you're a Democrat, whether you are in a blue state, red state, purple state, it affects everyone. Somehow we know it disproportionately affects people of color, but it has its impact everywhere. And thank you so much, Zoe Towns, for bringing that out. And thank you all again for watching Let It Be Known.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, that is really, we found that to be very, very helpful. Folks, the criminal justice reform, we got to get candidates, you got to get candidates talking about these things that are important to you. On this particular campaign. We've heard a lot about, particularly coming from one candidate, all about himself. We haven't heard about you. Um, and so here, forward.us, they want candidates to, not only do they want candidates to talk about what's important, but they are talking to people to find out what's important. And they have really dug into this. They found, did a lot of great research to back up their findings. And they find that it's a winning issue. Criminal justice reform is a winning issue. And it's unfortunate we don't hear a whole lot about it, but it is the issue. And so folks might want to look at who is doing what when it comes to criminal justice reform. We appreciate again us and their new polling, which shows that it's a winning issue. So check them out. Go to their website, and there you see that not only criminal justice reform, there's information on immigration reform. There's so much chock full of information on that website there. And the DACA, the federal prison population, and clemency. And as you saw Zoe Towns talk a little bit about clemency and the importance of that. So things that we tend to not think about a whole lot on a regular basis, but things that are extremely, extremely important. So check out forward.us and check it, give it a look. Give it a look. And we appreciate again Zoe Towns for joining us on Let It Be Known. We appreciate you as well. Please go to our YouTube page, hit subscribe, and tell all your friends and your foes about Let It Be Known news, and have them subscribe. You can debate them in the comments. Get your foes on there and debate them in the comments as well. Get your family members, and you guys can go back and forth like Michelle Madison does a lot. She just goes back and forth. We love Michelle Madison. And check out Michelle's Delicious Delights as well. And thank you all for watching. We will see you again tomorrow.